There's a question nobody inside the Pentagon briefing room asked out loud. Colbert asked it on live television, and the silence that followed it was longer than any answer the administration had given in 11 weeks of conflict. The map had been on the screen for 6 seconds when the Pentagon's communications director, watching the broadcast from a secure monitoring station at the Naval Observatory, picked up her phone and made a call that was not in her evening schedule. The call lasted 4 minutes. What was said in those 4 minutes was not recorded. What was documented was what happened next, a prepared statement drafted in the following 2 hours that answered 3 of the 4 questions Colbert had read directly from the map's annotation layer, and left the 4th question, the central one, the one that the map's own geographic logic made inescapable, without a single word of response. The omission was not an oversight. You do not draft a 4-paragraph statement about a late-night television segment and miss a question by accident. You leave it out because leaving it out is the only available option, and by the time the statement was released at 6:14 a.m., the clip had already been viewed 27 million times. And the 4th question was the reason. Start here. At the map. At the moment the evening's logic became visible, Colbert's hand was on the screen, not touching it, hovering just in front of it, his index finger tracing a route across the Gulf of Oman, toward the Strait of Hormuz that the administration's own operational briefings had described as the primary theater of the blockade. The map had 4 annotation layers. The first showed the declared objectives from the February 28 strike authorization, nuclear facility neutralization, ballistic missile infrastructure, IRGC command positions. The second showed the current status of each objective, compiled from CENTCOM's own public statements and the Pentagon's press briefings over the previous 11 weeks. The third showed the Strait of Hormuz, the blockade perimeter, and the 13 vessels currently detained. The 4th annotation layer was the one the Pentagon statement would not address, the gap between what the declared objectives had been on day 1 and what the administration's public rationale had become on day 73, a gap that, plotted geographically on the map, showed 2 entirely different operations occupying the same military infrastructure. Colbert's finger stopped at the gap. "Everything you just said," he said, looking away from the screen and directly at the camera, "was designed to fill the room with noise." One breath. But facts don't care about volume. He looked back at the map, and this map only tells the truth. But to understand why the map carried the weight it carried, why the Pentagon's communications director made an unscheduled call at 11:38 p.m., you have to go back to the beginning of the broadcast, to the segment before the map, to the moment Colbert placed the first document on the desk and began the specific, methodical work of reading an 11-week record against the statements that were supposed to describe it. Studio 601, Broadway. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert had been covering the Iran conflict since February 28th, the night the first strikes were authorized. Over 11 weeks, Colbert had dedicated 63 minutes of broadcast time to the conflict, not to the geopolitical context, not to the history, but to a specific and narrowing question. What is the stated objective of this operation, and is that objective the same one that was stated the week before? The question had been getting harder to answer because the administration's public rationale had been shifting with a frequency that, plotted on a timeline, had its own story to tell. That night, Colbert was going to tell it with a map. The desk had 3 items before the map segment began: a printed timeline, 61 days of public statements by the President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the National Security Advisor, each statement dated, each cited by source, each one describing the operation's primary objective. Colbert placed his finger on day 1. He read the objective: nuclear facility neutralization, preventing the path to a weapon. He moved his finger to day 14. He read the objective: regime change, removing the Supreme Leader's command authority. He moved to day 31. The objective: IRGC degradation, dismantling the proxy infrastructure. Day 47. Deterrence, preventing a potential Iranian first strike. Day 61. Economic pressure, the blockade framework, compelling negotiation. 5 different operations, Colbert said, looking at the timeline and then at the camera, using the same military infrastructure. He placed the document on the desk. In 11 weeks. A man in the studio audience made a sound that was not laughter. The second document, a compiled record of the Pentagon's public briefings over the same period, specifically the responses given when reporters asked about the operation's defined endpoint, the condition that would constitute mission completion. Colbert read 5 of them. The first, completion, is when Iran's nuclear capability has been verifiably dismantled. The second, completion, is when the regime has agreed to terms. The third, completion, is when the IRGC no longer poses a regional threat. The fourth, completion is when Iran accepts a negotiated framework. The fifth, the most recent, delivered by Pete Hegseth 3 days prior. Completion is when Iran chooses wisely. Colbert looked up. 5 different definitions of done, he said. Same 11 weeks. He placed the document beside the first. That's not a strategy. That's a moving target. The studio gave a sound that had something harder than laughter in its center. Then the map went up. The screen behind Colbert's desk went to full display. The map had been compiled from 4 sources: CENTCOM's own public operational briefing maps, the New York Times conflict tracker, CNN's geographic analysis, and a strategic assessment from a defense research institution whose work had been cited in 3 congressional briefings over the same period. The annotation layers loaded in sequence. Layer 1. The declared February 28th objectives, plotted geographically. The nuclear sites, the missile infrastructure, the IRGC positions, each one marked with its current status according to CENTCOM's own public statements. Layer 2. The current operational footprint. The blockade perimeter, the Strait of Hormuz corridor, the 13 detained vessels, the naval deployment, including the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. Layer 3. The gap. The geographic distance between what the operational footprint was designed to accomplish, physical control of Iranian maritime trade, and the stated objective of nuclear facility neutralization, which required a completely different set of military assets operating in a completely different geographic space. Colbert let the 3 layers sit on the screen for 8 seconds without speaking. Then he traced the route from the nuclear sites in central Iran to the blockade perimeter at the Strait of Hormuz. The distance on the map was 600 miles. The infrastructure of this operation, he said, is not pointed at the stated objective. He let the map hold the statement. The infrastructure of this operation is pointed at something the administration has not described publicly. He looked at the camera. And the map only tells the truth. Nobody in the studio spoke for a moment. The audio engineer later described as the cleanest 12-second silence he had ever recorded in a live broadcast. Then Colbert placed a 4th document on the desk, a cost analysis compiled from Congressional Budget Office projections and defense industry reporting, showing the daily operational cost of maintaining the current blockade posture versus the daily cost of the strike campaign that had been described on day 1 as the primary operational framework. The numbers did not agree with each other, not in scale, not in the kind of infrastructure required, not in the geographic orientation of the assets being deployed. The operation that was actually being conducted, the one the cost analysis described, was not the operation that had been authorized on February 28th. Colbert read the 2 cost figures side by side. He placed the document on the desk. "You keep saying this is fake," he said, to the camera, to the absent administration, to the statement he knew was being drafted somewhere at that moment. "So prove it, right now." He paused. In front of everyone. A door near the production wing opened. A man, former senior strategic analyst at CENTCOM, retired 14 months prior. He had worked in the role during the planning period that preceded the February 28th strikes. His testimony was operational, not political, not editorial, not contextual. He described the planning framework, the objective hierarchy that had been established in the pre-authorization briefings, and the specific geographic and asset requirements that each declared objective would have demanded. He described with the patient specificity of a man whose professional life had been organized around the principle that military operations mean what their operational requirements say they mean, the gap between what the declared objective of nuclear facility neutralization required and what the current operational posture was accomplishing. Trump's communications team had issued a statement 3 hours earlier calling any retired officer who spoke publicly about the operation a disgruntled employee manufacturing relevance through opposition research. The man absorbed this without visible response. "Silence doesn't protect anyone," he said. "It just makes the people who enforce it more comfortable." The second witness came through the same door 90 seconds later, a woman who had served as a foreign policy analyst in the State Department's Near Eastern Affairs Division during the period covered by the strategy timeline on the screen. She had worked directly with the negotiation framework documents that the administration had cited as evidence of diplomatic intent concurrent with the military operation. She had signed a separation agreement covering her work. She said so clearly, and then she continued, her voice held before the first sentence, the throat working, the jaw settling, the hands in her lap, with the grip of someone who has been rehearsing the distance between deciding to speak and actually speaking and has closed it. She described the negotiation documents. She named the specific conditions that the framework required in order to be operational. She described the military posture that would be required to support a genuine negotiation track, and then she described the military posture that was actually in place. When Trump's press secretary issued a statement during the broadcast, declaring her testimony a fabrication produced by partisan actors, she absorbed it the way a person absorbs something they have been expecting. "I stayed quiet because I was afraid," she said, "but I was more afraid of what it meant if I never spoke." The audience did not erupt. A man in the left section brought his hands together once, deliberate, specific, the sound of recognition without performance. A second person joined from across the studio. A third, from a different section entirely. The Late Show studio filled in the slow, convergent wave of an audience that has arrived, without instruction, at the understanding that silence is no longer the correct response to what it has witnessed. Colbert let the applause reach its natural level and settle back into quiet. He looked at the map, still on the screen behind him. He looked at the camera. "The infrastructure of 11 weeks of statements," he said, "doesn't point toward an objective. It points toward an improvisation." He paused. "And the map is still on the screen, and the map only tells the truth." Trump's response came in the form of 4 Truth Social posts in the 90 minutes following the broadcast, measured, then longer, then louder, then operating in the specific register of full capitals that indicates an argument that has run out of vocabulary. Each post promised a counter-briefing that had not been scheduled. Each was screenshot and placed beside the specific map annotation it was denying. The Pentagon statement, released at 6:14 a.m., answered 3 questions and omitted the 4th. 3 network broadcasts reproduced the map alongside the statement before 8 a.m., with the 4th annotation layer highlighted. The gap between operational footprint and declared objective, geographic, specific, unanswerable. And no commentary, because no commentary was required. The word infrastructure appeared as a segment title on 2 platforms beneath the frozen image of Colbert's finger, tracing the 600-mile gap. By noon, the clip had crossed 44 million views. The 4th question remained unanswered. If this changed how you see power, hit subscribe. If it didn't, watch it again. The details you missed the first time are the ones that matter most. Notifications on. Next one drops soon.